All right, let's dive into something I think is incredibly important, the hidden world of how we learn. And we're going to do it through the story of a young man named Aarav. He's this really bright, super curious student in Hyderabad, and his love for learning, well, it was about to face its biggest challenge yet.
See, this question right here? Ma'am, but why did this revolution begin? That was pure Aarav. You know how most students are just laser-focused on marks? Not him. He was the one always asking, but why? He wasn't trying to just cram facts for a test. No, he genuinely wanted to understand how things worked.
But then, things started to change. That natural curiosity, that love of learning, it started to fade away. The pressure began piling on from every direction, and the whole reason he studied just completely flipped. So what on earth happened to that kid?
Well, a lot of it started right at home. You know how those conversations can go? They slowly shift from how was school to score predictions. His dad's voice was a constant refrain. Remember, 95% is the minimum. The bar was set so ridiculously high that anything less felt like a total failure. The pressure was really starting to build. And then his mom chimed in with that classic, subtle but not so subtle social comparison. Sharma auntie's daughter scored 98. Boom. Just like that, it wasn't about his own learning anymore. It was all about how he stacked up against everyone else. And just to top it all off, his tuition teacher added this final, terrifying layer of fear. The message was loud and clear. If you forget in the exam hall, it's finished. It wasn't just, oh, you made a mistake. No. Forgetting was the end of the world. It was a catastrophe. And right there, that's the big shift, isn't it? Aarav wasn't studying to understand things anymore. He was studying to avoid feeling fear. His goal wasn't the joy of discovery. It was this desperate scramble to avoid shame, to avoid disappointing everyone. Learning had literally become an act of survival. So picture this. It's the night before his big history exam, and this one single thought just takes over his entire mind. What if I forget? He knew this stuff. He knew it cold, but his brain was just stuck on repeat, playing that same terrifying question over and over. He barely slept a wink. Okay, so this is where the science comes in, and it's fascinating. His brain, which couldn't tell the difference between an exam and, say, a tiger, perceived a massive threat. And what does it do? It floods his system with cortisol, the stress hormone. His body was literally gearing up for a fight or flight response against a piece of paper. So what does all that cortisol actually do? Well, it basically shoves the brain into survival mode. And when you're in survival mode, things like complex memory recall, the brain decides those are not essential. It's like your body is saying, we don't have time for history facts, we might need to run. The hippocampus, which is your memory hub, pretty much goes offline. The information is still in there, but the connection between knowing it and being able to say it, it's just gone. All right, let's fast forward to the exam hall. The paper lands on his desk. He takes a breath, scans the page, and there it is, question 3. It's the one about the revolt, the one he knew better than anything else. You'd think this would be a huge moment of relief, right? But it wasn't. He just stared at the question, and his mind, it was completely, totally blank. Nothing. The very fear he'd been so terrified of, it had finally happened. It had won. And here's the crazy part. He hadn't actually forgotten the answer. The knowledge was still in his head. But all that stress, all that cortisol, it had basically slammed a big, heavy door shut on his memory and locked it tight. He was on one side, banging on that door, trying to get to the answer, but fear was on the other side, holding the key. So the next day in class, his teacher could tell something was off. She gently asked him the exact same question from the test. And what happens? He answers it perfectly, without even hesitating. And her response was just brilliant. She said, "You didn't forget. Your stress remembered more than your brain did." Think about that. His body remembered the fear, and that memory was so powerful it just completely shut down his brain. Aarav's story really shines a light on two massive dangers of learning under intense stress. First, it just sucks the joy right out of it. Learning becomes a chore, not a discovery. And second, it creates this bizarre understanding gap where a kid can be absolutely brilliant, know all the answers, but be completely unable to get to that information when it matters. And this really shows you the two totally different worlds of learning. On one hand, you have learning in fear. Your memory is shaky, you're constantly second-guessing yourself, but on the other hand, you have learning with safety. This idea of psychological safety is huge, not just in schools, but in the best companies too. When you feel safe, your brain just plain works better. It's not magic, it's biology. The connections in your brain get stronger and pulling out information becomes second nature.
So the teacher actually called Aarav's parents, and she didn't even mention his grade. Instead, she asked them one single question that just completely changed the conversation. She asked, "When was the last time you told him you were proud of his effort, not his marks?" Wow, right? It wasn't about him failing, it was about the support system failing him.
And that night, something incredible happened. His father said the one thing Aarav needed to hear more than anything else in the world. You are more important than your percentage. He gave him permission to be a person, not just a number. He gave him that emotional safety net. And the result of that one conversation, it was night and day. The next test he took, he was calm. A tough question came up, and there was no panic, no war inside his head. That door to his memory, it wasn't just unlocked, it was flung wide open. He could finally think clearly, all because he felt safe.
So what's the big takeaway from Aarav's story for all of us, parents, teachers, everyone? Well, here are some key truths. First, stress does not make students stronger. It actually sabotages them. Real understanding is what builds a solid memory. Feeling safe isn't some nice-to-have bonus. It's the bedrock that lets a brain reach its full potential. And maybe most importantly, encouragement is what protects a child's intelligence.
When you really think about it, the difference between forgetting something and remembering it, it's not always about intelligence, is it? It's about peace. We're so obsessed with pressure and performance, but maybe the most critical ingredient for a brilliant mind to actually thrive isn't more pressure, it's peace of mind. And that leaves us with a pretty big thought. Maybe the goal isn't to make our kids tougher, but to make their world a little bit safer.